So we are here today to discuss what is the best Cartoon Network's comedy show. I am going to be arguing for The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, and
I am going to argue for Ed and Eddie.
Ed and Eddie. Yeah. Okay. So
we are the judges.
we have judges here to decide who wins this debate, discussion type thing. Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. I don't know. Is there anything funnier than the thing about this show is that there are moments from this show that I will think about randomly, like all these years later, and it will still make me like laugh in real time. Like the episode of the Tangelos and stuff like. It's weird having this discussion because there are references to things that maybe not everybody remembers or has seen.
Yeah.
But like the Tangelos and Fred Burger, all of the weird characters in that show. I think that the interesting thing about Billy and Mandy is it had so many weird characters, but it was so interesting and funny at the same time.
I think Ed and Eddie definitely beats on the weird characters. I mean, literally, one of Ed's favorite quotes is "butter toast, butter toast." So that's like definitely already its own interesting. But besides that, we also have but there's just that alone. But we got like Rolf, which is like there's memes of Rolf. Like let's not forget like the Ultra Instinct meme of Rolf, where they put Rolf's voice clip over Goku Ultra Instinct going Rolf not again and all these sort of things. So like that's what let alone. But besides the weird thing, I think what make Ed and Eddie such a good comedy show is that it had such an interesting dynamic where it's about you didn't want them to win because they're basically essentially doing something fucked up, which is scamming kids just so they can get jawbreakers.
Yeah, the whole thing is about scammers.
And the beauty part of that show is that like the luck of that show is like that luck will go against them. So there's always something for whatever reason that will go wrong, and no matter what, they'll just get screwed. It's literally like the opposite of Phineas and Ferb, where everything just goes right for these white kids. I don't know. I'm assuming. I guess we would assume they're white, but the point is,
but they're trailer trash white, so things can go wrong for them.
Yes, exactly. So it was such a beautiful show within that, and just that alone, it was just such an interesting dynamic. And then we have like characters like Johnny, which was such a weird character, and then even Jimmy, and then even the Kanker sisters, which nowadays when I look back, I'm like, I don't know how
there's some weird sexual manipulation going on in that show, which is not happening in Adventures of Billy and Mandy.
This is post Me Too, so pre Me Too, obviously, of course. So that would definitely have a different dynamic. But the point is, the show again, it's definitely one of the most memorable comedy shows in the world, and I feel like a lot of people, the fan base itself is so strong and debated to the point where even people are making their own live action adaptations on the YouTube community. So it's just a great, unique show.
I think when you're talking about the dynamics between characters, it's hard to beat Grim, the Reaper of Death, and Billy and Mandy. Mandy is just like this dark, like tough-like character who doesn't care about anybody or anything, but is just like exudes cool, and Billy is just like this idiotic person who, for whatever reason, Mandy tolerates, and Grim, and they hang out with a Death Reaper. Like it's, I don't know how you think of something like that, but just the notion of this show, the premise alone, I think it's better than Ed and Eddie is funny, but it's essentially just kids in a cul-de-sac. Going on adventures every so often. They rarely leave the cul-de-sac. Like in Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, you have adventures literally in hell. You have going through different like alternate dimensions. Billy becomes the father to a sentient spider, the giant spider, and it's like some weird, crazy stuff happens in that show. It's pretty awesome.
But I think that's what makes the Ed and Eddie have an interesting aspect because within its rules, it's very creative in that aspect. I mean, we literally had episodes where they broke, like Ed is so random that he's able to break the freaking time fabric and they're able to literally go out of the dimensions just because they were literally doing some weird scam. And that's what I love about the show with it, because I do feel like, as much as I Grim Adventures of Billy and Eddie, keep in mind, it's like one of my favorite shows, and I love the dark comedy, and I think I blame a lot of my dark sense of humor from Grimm. That being said, I do feel like a show like that, a lot of it is sort of like, you kind of can be predictable about how the characters are.
No, I think when you're talking about predictability, the Ed and Eddie is so formulaic and every episode is like the same thing pretty much happening, just like with a different thing on top of it. But with Billy and Mandy, you don't know what you're gonna get with what episodes you're watching. You don't know what's gonna happen. You know that they're probably gonna, something's probably gonna go wrong and they're gonna have to fix it. But like, it's not like they're scamming. They're trying to figure out a scam to get jawbreakers every year.
Yeah, it's a goal, but even then within the scams they do is very interesting in how, example, how they do it, how everything does get sabotaged. Not to mention within episodes where they don't even go scam, or at least scam for jawbreakers. There's episodes where they're just trying to chill, do a plan, but then, maybe for example, Kevin is looking at them a certain way and he's just like, "What's up, Kevin?" Or even an episode where they were trying to like appeal to Naz, like as in like she's this rich blog or something like that. And then or one of my favorite episodes was like the episode where they literally got this boomerang and they had like a split personality where Ed was like smarter, Double D was a stripper, freaking Eddie became like a mom. Like, it was just a very interesting, like, again, it's a show that it takes is sort of like the aesthetic of like kids in a cul-de-sac, and then like what can we do with it without breaking within its rules, because it's like for the most part of the show it is this similar like eight characters, and but that's what makes it really engaging as a creative thing.
They did great with that structure, but I just think at the end of the day when you're comparing it to something like Billy and Mandy, they're limited. Like one of my favorite things is the Billy and Mandy Christmas special movie where Santa Claus becomes a vampire and they have to slay vampire Santa Claus. Like the fun Billy is like, "How do you destroy a Christmas tree? You gotta stomp on it." It's like the craziest, the funniest things out of that show. And like there's so much freedom where you can do random crazy things and have it make sense, whereas in Ed and Eddie, you kind of have to stick within the confines of this world that's been created. And they do a good job in that world, but I think at the overall, it limits its potential.
I think that it actually makes it more of its potential, because even, for example, the Christmas episode with Ed and Eddie, what I love about it was like a good character development story. But you see at the end why Eddie still chooses to be selfish, because he even says, well, if Santa Claus is about giving, and you're supposed to get this when you deserve giving, then I deserve to get it. And it's making a reasonable argument with it. And it's just like, even with the show, where it's like a show where, and this is funny because both shows, what they both have in common is this whole idea of like why you shouldn't really follow moral lessons. But at the same time, I do feel like Ed and Eddie's reasoning behind it, number one, it shows the consequences. But so it's not saying you should just screw it. But number two, what even makes it more interesting in terms of the Ed and Eddie concept of moral lessons, like you get why these characters are these way. You get that. Not to say Billy and Mandy isn't. Like, of course, Billy and Mandy for the most part, like you have like, Grimm is this personification of evil. I don't know why Mandy's evil. They just want to have an evil white girl and a dumb person.
I think it makes sense.
But what I love about the like Ed's type of dumbness is just, again, it's like he's just this very unique thing, and it's like it's common. Like, this guy loves chickens. The next time he sees a chicken, he's gonna do something unpredictable, grab a chicken, come out of it. It's gonna screw up a plan, and Eddie's gonna be like, "This idiot." And what I love is Double D, because every time I listen to Double D, it's like they often like Double D will say some smart things that I would be like, "What the hell?" And even some points they even break up the fourth wall, which I really love how they do it in Ed and Eddie, because it's very subtle. It's not like obvious. Versus like sometimes with Billy and Mandy, they'll be obvious. It's like, "Hey, that does not look like us in that episode," and stuff like that. Or Eddie would be like, "Well, Kevin wasn't in this episode." Well, I forget that. Point is, I love you with Double D. So there's always that kind of that story arc of lessons, but it's still done in a way where it's sort of not just saying, "Oh, just do the right thing." It's just kind of like, this is why we don't do the right thing. So that's what I love about with Ed and Eddie, that the comedy still plays within that. Like, they kind of make fun of the whole medium of a good lesson moral that you see in your everyday TV show.
I feel like the comedy of Billy and Mandy just made me laugh much more. I think that it's a great combination of like smart comedy with dumb comedy, but like dumb comedy done well. And I feel like I just feel like it was done better with Billy and Mandy than with Ed, Ed and Eddie.
I think as much as I do love Billy and Mandy's comedy, I just feel like a lot of it is sort of like you can see in other comedies. And I feel like, and it makes sense for what they have, but it's like, when you have something where it's like you're going to play with these elements, you kind of expect that. But with Ed and Eddie, there's sort of this idea where it's like, even though they're confined with what they have, the fact that they're able to make like absurdity over the smallest things, where it's like you only have 8 characters, but yet we can make absurdity and tools with it. It's just, to me, it's just an interesting dynamic where you can have an episode where it's basically like them just selling lemonade, but for whatever reason, somehow chickens are going to be involved because Ed just loves chicken. Somehow, like, Double D is going to complain how this defines logic, and Eddie doesn't care because he just wants a scam. And somehow, for whatever reason, they get beat up at the end, or whatever tragedy, just because something weird within the font. It's like, basically, it's like, this is simple, but how do we not make it simple? How did it just get out of hand? And you see that every episode, and it's just, to me, that's what makes it engaging and why I think it's one of the best comedy shows. It's very unique, it's very creative, it's very something you can never really see much.
Okay.
I get that, but I think at the end of the day,
Let's go for last point, yeah?
yeah, last one. I think for as far as Ed, Ed and Eddie, I understand it. Like it's does its thing really well. I just feel like when I'm watching it, I don't necessarily feel like I'm missing something if I missed an episode. Like I don't think I'm gonna like miss out if I don't watch everything that Ed, Ed and Eddie has, because it's like you watch most of it, you get it. Like it's the same thing over and over again. It's like, yeah, they did it differently, but it's fun, but it's not like you're getting anything new. Whereas with Billy and Mandy, you literally don't know what you're gonna get, and every time it's hilarious. So that's my final point.
I think that there's a lot. Ed and Eddie has definitely affected the culture, and it even ended. Like that's what happened to Ed and Eddie. It actually ended. I know Billy and Mandy, they didn't really end.
Also, one last point for Billy and Mandy. They had black representation with Grimm. He's Jamaican.
He's Jamaican. Also, they also had a white girl play a black voice. The person's Erin is played by a white girl. But let's ignore that. For black representation, right? But yeah, Ed and Eddie, for the most part, it even had it ended, right? It had the big picture show.
That's
the
true.
show its ending, and we actually saw character development and all that stuff. We saw why Eddie is what he is. His brother was an asshole, so he's an asshole. He lived up to his brother. So we saw all these things, and it just it's definitely, the humor is very creative. It's its own community. People will know things like butter toast, chicken. It's not a. Oh my god, I'm gonna see the quote right now. It's not just cows double D. It's a way of life. Like just iconic moments like that are just naturally bold from its the structure of the show. And I think that's where I'll definitely have to give it the best comedy, just because it's just a unique thing. It's its own thing. I don't think it would ever be repeatable again. And it's just like it really defined the Cartoon era, especially in the early 2000s.
Before we start judging, so the prompt, just to clarify the prompt, it's just whichever one is the better show, right?
The best comedy
show.
Yeah.
So was the focus supposed to primarily be on comedy or just the show?
The
comedy and the show. It's kind of both.
It wasn't clear to
Kind of
us.
both?
You kind of went general, both of you guys.
Yeah, it's kind of general.
Okay.
So I'll judge
I'll just
based
say
on that.
better show.
Yeah.
Okay.
In general.
Do you have anything to say?
Well, first off, I've only watched like a couple episodes as a kid of both.
Oh wow.
So I'm a very, very unbiased judge.
Oh, that's perfect.
So I'm mainly doing it off of your arguments and who had better ones. And I'd say both of you had really, really great points. So it's very difficult to judge based off of that. But as a personal preference, I think Billy and Mandy sounds like a show I would rather watch because of the whole premise. Like how he, in the beginning, he described it as like a premise where like there's this girl that's smart, and then this guy who's an idiot, and then the Grim Reaper. That sounds like a very interesting combo. But then you describing the limitations of Ed and Eddie being there but them still making it like interesting makes me want to watch that as well to see how they do that, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
So both are very good arguments.
Well, no, Chuku made a good argument saying that like there were some rules, like it's always going to be the same people within the cul-de-sac, but they would get up to like some fantastical things sometimes, and like you mentioned that like with like Ed breaking like time and space,
stuff
and
like that.
I think you kind of were getting into like the spirit of Ed, Ed, Eddie. It was like, which was just like, it was all kids in a cul-de-sac, right? And they're using like their imaginations and whatever like tools they could to kind of like have a good time as they were. And like some of the schemes and some of just like the plans and fun things that they would do like in the cul-de-sac were like, it was always like something really different every time. And like you touched on that, and I like that argument. Whereas for Billy and Mandy, the humor was like pretty dark in that show, right? I feel like you didn't like lean into that argument more. I feel like if you did, that would have differentiated your argument for Billy and Mandy and kind of given it the edge for your argument versus Ed, Ed and Eddie. I guess if we're talking about whose argument we're choosing now,
I mean, for context, you've watched both shows, right?
Yeah. I think I definitely watched more Ed, Ed, and Eddie. I watched a lot of Billy and Mandy. You didn't even mention, like, one of my favorite characters in Billy and Mandy was, like, Aries. Remember? She was like a regular character.
Who?
Aries from Billy and Mandy. She was like, they made Aries, like, blonde.
Oh, that girl, the one that Grim had a crush on, and
Yeah.
then Delgado, they started dating and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
There was stuff I loved about Billy and Mandy.
Yeah.
It's been a
But
couple years since we've seen these shows. But
It was.
Years.
There are other, like, Cartoon Network shows where it's like funny and like it's situational and like you could do anything, but I think with like Ed, Ed and Eddie, because there was kind of this like community thing going on and like making it more like almost like sitcom like, but in like a fun, cartoony, crazy way, like that. You touched on this.
Yeah.
Like that's what gives Ed, Ed and Eddie the edge for me. Also iconic opening song.
So judges are allowed to do this, by the way. I'm saying it right now. I'm gonna say tie for me personally, because I thought both of you came up with very interesting arguments that made me want to check out both shows.
Okay.
So I thought both sides were argued pretty strongly for someone who hasn't watched either of the shows. I mean, I've watched it as a kid, like, but I don't have many memories of it. Like, I watched like a couple episodes as a kid, but of each.
I watched both a lot. I want to say I watched like all of Billy and Mandy, but for some reason Ed and Eddie is like just like more in my mind, like at the forefront, and maybe that's why maybe I'm a little biased, but also your argument was solid to me, so I'm going with Chuku, Ed and Eddie.
Cool.
Yes.
Well, let us know if you like Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy in the comments.
And Eddie, which one you thought was a better comedy show?
Sure. Be sure to like and subscribe. Catch you in the next one.
Peace.
I can't believe you brought up black representation. I was like, you better not, but you did.